Welcome, everyone, to the Awareness Connection. I'm James French, a teaching assistant at the Dimon Institute in New York City. I'm joining Ted Dimon, the director of the Dimon Institute in New York City. Thanks for listening to this week's podcast.
Yeah, the topic this week is tensegrity, which is a sort of an architectural term, but it applies quite directly to the problem of awareness and the topic of our podcast, and that's what we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. Tensegrity was a really exciting concept when I first heard you talk about it. And I've got questions for you, and there's just a lot to talk about. I think this is a really rich topic, and I think that you've got a unique way of applying it to the work that we do. I think that you've got a unique way of applying it to human anatomy. And when I say unique, I'm not sure that anybody else's application of tensegrity to the human body quite does what yours does.
Yeah. Well, first of all, maybe we should say something about why it even should apply to awareness. So I think that's sort of important.
Yeah. Maybe a word first, maybe some definitions too.
Yeah.
The word tensegrity itself.
Yeah.
Tensegrity is an interesting term. It's it's one of those combination terms. It's a portmanteau. It's a combination of two words: tension or tensile and integrity. So tension and integrity. And it was coined, that term was a word that was invented by the mid 20th century architect Buckminster Fuller. Really interesting guy. Do you want to say anything about him?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned him because I guess I began to read his stuff in relation to the tensegrity because I had heard him connected with it and I was looking into this concept.
Mm-hmm.
But his ideas are fascinating because he was someone who many decades ago was already talking about saving the climate, the importance of looking at how we were building materials to make homes and how we were taking them out of the earth and how destructive that was. Didn't just speak about protecting the planet in terms of fossil fuels, but also building materials because we take them out of the earth. And tensegrity directly applied to his concern about planet Earth because he felt that unless we figured out how to build and construct things not in this awkward, archaic way that we still do, he said we would hurt the planet. So tensegrity was a concept that he explored. He didn't entirely invent it. He invented the term, but he explored as a way of thinking about how to build things. When we look at a geodesic dome or a tent, these structures that are lightweight and they're using struts and tensile parts like cord or guy wires or tent to make a structure rather than just big heavy walls, that's a tensegrity structure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So he had a really expansive, like a really, really expansive view of the concept. I mean, as far as I understand, he used the concept of tensegrity very broadly, looking through nature, and he seemed to find it everywhere he looked.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, I guess, just to be clear for listeners, a tensegrity structure, you said it's composed of elements like, say, guy wires or fabric, some sort of material that can be pulled apart.
Hmm.
And then it's composed of another element, which is like a rigid structure, like you know, a metal rod, pieces of wood, you know. So there's two essential elements here. The one is wires and the other is sort of rigid structures. And then the strict definition of tensegrity, and I find this interesting, the strict definition of tensegrity would be a continuous tension and floating compression, where all of those rods or, you know, rigid elements are sort of floating within a web of tension elements. So none of the rods are touching each other. They're sort of like, you know, they're spaced apart with each other. And the softer, you know, wire-like elements are being pulled apart, and every single one of them is being pulled apart at the same time. So there's a net of tension and a you know, a net or a web of tension elements sort of holding the shape given to them by the compression elements.
Yeah. Yeah, or even a really simple example, you mentioned the two elements of, so if a guy wire has a special property of resisting being pulled apart, that's different than, let's say, a pole, which has a specific characteristic of resisting being pressed down. So one is a compression structure and one is a tensile structure.
Yeah.
And you can make a tensegrity if you create an opposition between the two. Then that's a very easy, efficient, lightweight way of creating some kind of supported structure. And the simplest example I know of would be a tent. So you have a pole, you have that resists compression, you have the guy wire pulling on the pole. The guy wire keeps the pole from falling over. At the same time, the pole is stretching the guy wire. The opposition between the guy wire and the pole creates a very lightweight house. So when you go camping, you bring a pole and a piece of tarp or plastic, and you can create a lightweight, you can carry it on your back because it's so lightweight, and you make a little home. You wouldn't bring 2x4s and cement or blocks or something.
Yeah.
And that's a tensegrity structure. And as Buckminster Fuller said, it's a lot cheaper, a lot more lightweight, and a lot more efficient than building walls.
Yeah, like, you know, you wouldn't want to carry around bricks if you're on a hiking trip.
Yeah.
You know? And it's amazing how light some of these, like, you know, some of these, for example, backpacking tents get. I mean, you know, you've got some foldable plastic rods, or like, you know, even maybe like a fiberglass rod set, and then you've got this you know, somewhat flexible tent fabric, and you fit the rods through little loops within the fabric. The rods pull on the tent fabric pulls back on the rods, and you get this shape that can cover you.
Yep.
And it weighs almost nothing.
And it weighs a few pounds. Yeah.
Yeah. And it, like, you know, with the interplay of the rigid tent poles and the tent fabric itself, you get a structure that's not easily distorted either. You know, it can be rained on, twigs can fall on it when it's set up properly, and it won't instantly collapse. In fact, it's quite resistant to collapse. It's buoyant. It's very, very, very buoyant.
Well, another way to put it is it is flexible. It's resistant to collapse, but it's also able to absorb distortion in such a way that it doesn't take too much stress in any one place. Okay, but let's relate it to living things. You say, well, this is a created, you know, artificial designed structure, not like what you'd have in nature, like a tree, and yet a tree has tensile tensegrity characteristics, because it's not just about resisting compression like the trunk, which can resist a huge amount of downward weight. It also has branches that have to resist being pulled apart. So a tree is tensile. And it turns out, and Buckminster said this decades ago, that throughout nature you can find tensegrity structures. So and not only can you find them, but they're far more efficient and complex and sophisticated even than human-made tensegrity structures, which is going to bring us to our real issue here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can imagine that like a cell is a tensegrity structure. It's this fluid. It's a bunch of fluid surrounded by a boundary. It's almost like a balloon in that way.
Yep.
And so this concept of tensegrity has been applied to the form of cells and how they how like internal pressure of cells pushes against the cell membrane. The cell membrane pushes back against the internal fluid.
Yeah. Kind of a polarity principle, kind of in
polarity principle. Yeah. It's this interplay between push and pull.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does this apply to awareness and why? Let's talk about
like
body.
How does that apply to awareness? I mean, so it's in its application to, if it applies to awareness, then that means it applies to the living, aware human body. I mean, is that correct to say?
Yeah, but the first thing to my mind is how is it even a part of the human body? So maybe I should say why, how I applied it and why I thought it was related.
Yeah, because it seems like it certainly could apply to microstructures like cells, like we said. And I've heard people apply it to individual, like intervertebral discs. I've seen people apply it to, maybe how the shoulder works or how the ankle works or even how the back works.
Yeah.
What's your take on this? Like how do you apply it? And how did you come about applying it in the work that you do?
Yeah. So here I am studying the human body and how to be aware specifically of muscles and what we're doing with muscles in activity. And I have, through my own experience, I've observed that muscles that get too tight have to let go. They need to, their muscles, not all muscles are tightening. A lot of muscles are not doing enough work, so they're too flaccid. But the typical problem that you face, and I faced early on in my career with my back trouble, was that I had muscles that were too tight and wanted to know what to do about them. And I had learned that if I could pay attention to parts of my body in such a way that muscles could let go, the body worked more efficiently. And I wanted to understand why it worked that way, what was behind that. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what is the principle of muscle function that could explain why they need to why when they let go, the body works more efficiently and balances out, because that isn't just a matter of letting go of muscle tension. That's a property of muscles that seem to work with bones in a more efficient way. So I was told, well, muscles don't want to just tighten, they need to let go, and when they let go, they're more efficient. But that doesn't explain efficiency, or a lack of pathology, doesn't explain why, when muscles are more efficient in that way, the whole system seems to get lighter and more efficient as a whole. Parts work better. And it dawned on me that the problem isn't that muscles are tight and need to let go. There must be a way in which muscles worked with bone, muscles and connective tissue, because muscles are attached to tissue to bones as part of a connective tissue network. So there must be a way that muscles and connective tissue work with bone as a normative or normal process. And it dawned on me that that was a property of muscle, that muscles don't just contract and need to let go, need to let go as part of how they work with bones. And when I came up with that idea, I realized that there was already an architectural principle that kind of explained that, and that was tensegrity. And now that has a whole different now we've got a whole different relationship to the problem of muscle tension and how to be aware than simply using our awareness to relax muscles or improve muscles or stop tightening muscles or feel better. Now we've got a quality in the system that has to be restored as the basis for being aware, rather than using our awareness simply to relax muscles.
Well, okay, so you're experiencing, and you know, you're being taught about, you know, the fact that you've got back trouble and it's related to muscle tightness, muscle tension, and you're experiencing releases throughout your body. And you're not just experiencing releases throughout your body, because evidently you felt that what you were being told about, you know, release, you know, about muscles being tight or whatever, was inadequate to explain the new function that you were experiencing. Is that right? It was like this isn't just release. This is like, my back is working differently than it did before. Like, this is my like whole body seems to be working not just better than it was before or more comfortably, but with new functional properties, or maybe restored functional properties. And it seems like you felt that it was theoretically inadequate to explain it simply as release of tension.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and you know this, but if you suffer from too much tension, as I did, very often you'll decide that tension is evil, you got to get rid of it. And then you say, well, relaxation is good, or body work, or something that's going to relieve me of that. And then you're going to impute some sort of therapeutic or deeper benefit to it. But you haven't explained where the tension came from. And you haven't explained what qualities need to be present for the system to work properly. So it's really just, you're really just still in a therapeutic mode, thinking more meaningful or educational or something. And I wanted to know not just how to relieve my back trouble. I saw that there was a way that the body could work better. And this began to explain what that was. So that, now you're not just talking about looking. I was no longer looking for or I wasn't loyal to a method that helped me. I was trying to understand the underlying functions that needed to be understood for the field to become meaningful. Because from my vantage point, everything I tried was just therapy and wasn't really helping and wasn't really giving me it. I somehow didn't have the knowledge I needed to understand the problem.
Yeah. And so you're uncovering not just the way that the body could work better, it seems, but it seems like we're uncovering something so I don't know. It isn't that it's so much better. It just, when you're working in this manner and you can take it almost to an endpoint where muscles release, but they also, the body parts seem to recoordinate and sort of snap into, I don't even know how to say it, but like snap into coordination. And you seem to discover how the body is designed to work, you
Yeah.
know? It's like, you know, we often call that like the functional design of the body. It's hard to say, it's hard to express what that is, but it seems like there's a way that the body is designed to work.
Yeah.
And like you've
Yeah.
often, you often show pictures of like little children, like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how they're sitting totally effortlessly, or how a 2-year-old is standing totally effortlessly, and it seems like they've got this quality to them, and it isn't just like a beauty or like a charisma.
Yes.
It's like physical properties of their body, the way that it's
Yeah.
working.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And like, how do you explain that? And like, why it's almost like, why are we satisfied with simply therapeutic models
Yeah.
that don't seek to explain natural function, you know?
Yeah. It sort of makes me think of, I don't know who said this. Was it William James or someone? We look for we look for cures to an illness. We don't look for health. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
we all do that, even when health might be definable. We're not as interested in health as we are in being free of illness, in a sense. And it's a terribly negative attitude because, as you say, a typical 2-year-old in a typical 2-year-old, the back muscles, the tensegrity structure, the connective tissues are working perfectly. And
Mhm.
instead of understanding that and trying to understand why we've lost it, the moment we have a problem, we're desperately looking for a solution.
Mm.
So and then run in the wrong direction. We don't run toward the health, we run toward illness and say, there must be something wrong.
Mhm.
Who can fix it? And very often, if we go to a doctor and they say, well, what you have is a specific, diagnosable problem, we're relieved that they found the problem because we feel like, well, if they know what the problem is, they can give me the cure. But muscle problems, typically, these kinds of problems, are not medical problems. They are more functional. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
again, you see this all the time. A voice person knows, and a lot of voice people who have experience with a voice know that if they're having a certain kind of strain, then you have to look at your technique. But the moment you have a problem with your voice that gets to a point that you would describe as kind of clinical or pathological, then you say, oh my God, there's something wrong with my voice. I need a cure.
Mm. Yeah,
The
yeah,
origin of a lot of voice problems have nothing to do with something medical. The origin of many of these kinds of problems are functional. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because
yeah, yeah,
and so yeah, and then there's the larger question of, if you can restore the system, and you can,
yeah,
then you're not just going back to the way the 2-year-old is,
yeah,
but you're doing it at a conscious level. So we need a knowledge of how the system works, and we need knowledge of how to regain and restore that system at a
yeah,
level which is different than a 2-year-old, because a 2-year-old just enjoys their natural ease of function without knowing why it's working this way, just like a cat.
yeah,
But we need to get it back, not passively. It doesn't need to be given to us. We need to get it back at a level that we can understand and gain control over.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I really like that you mentioned William James, and I really like that idea of James, is that, we seek lack of illness rather than seeking health. We flee from illness rather than seeking health. And so what 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 your view is here is that there is actually like a design spec to the to the human body, to the functional, maybe like the postural function of the human body.
Yep.
And to grapple with it, to look at someone and say, um, your body is working according to design specs, that means that you have to have some kind of a handle on what those specs are, and you have to be able to look at someone or like put your hand on them or something and know. And
Yeah.
you as someone who's working on your own, trying to get these things happening, you've got to know as well.
Yeah.
You've got to have some sort of idea yourself. And so, like, tensegrity, I think, is a concept that we have to grapple with. We have to employ concepts from this field, and I think tensegrity itself is very important for us to utilize when we're studying human functional design, when we're talking about how we're designed to move around in space.
Yeah.
And so I mean, one of the characteristics then would be how the muscle system is functioning.
Yeah.
I mean,
So, yeah, as you know, when I realized that muscles don't just have they don't just contract. That's the typical story of muscles, that muscles are the function of a muscle is to contract or resist being stretched because it's got some contractile power. And in doing that, it maintains stability of parts or actively pulls on parts to maintain posture and to produce movement. And that's what a muscle does. But I don't believe that's all a muscle does. I think a muscle is also part of the connective tissue network. And in that context, it is meant to lengthen between bony struts and maintains a polarity or tension between the pushing of the bony struts and the pulling of the muscle. And in that context, it maintains support with a minimum of effort. And that's a principle we find in nature, all throughout nature. But in order for that to be, in order to understand that, you've got to now define a different or new aspect of muscle function, which I don't think has been defined, which is that muscles have the property of being able to lengthen, and in that context to resist being stretched further, but they have to lengthen first in order for the tensegrity system to work.
So when you say lengthen, we can voluntarily contract muscles. That's a property that muscles have that, we don't need to talk about. But like, when you mean lengthen, do you mean like, I mean, you don't mean we can voluntarily push apart muscle fiber.
Exactly.
Okay, lengthening is like a bit of a tough word in that case. But what you mean is literally the definition of tension.
Lengthen, muscle can't do lengthening. It can't lengthen as something that it does.
Yeah.
It doesn't
It's
perform.
It's the very definition of tension from physics. It's like being pulled between 2 points. It's like a tension force is pulling between 2 opposite points.
Right. But that isn't lengthening muscle either, because you could do that stretching, passive stretching.
Yeah.
Lengthening is when a muscle that has contractile function and it has a lot of these deep in the muscle, in every muscle fiber, you have all these thousands of filaments, actin and myosin chains that are able to overlap or resist being, they telescope like this, the muscle shortens, and then they resist being lengthened. A muscle that lengthens, these have to stop doing that so that these can let go, and the muscle will allow, within its own internal structure, it will allow the 2 points to go opposite each other. So it's something it does, it's something it kind of allows, but it's a property of muscles that is often not working in people. You can, like you said, you can see when it's not working, you can feel it, and you can, if you know what you're doing, you can help it to come about.
Yeah.
And you could feel it working in a typical 2-year-old, the whole back, everything is lengthening. Tissues have this elastic quality, and they have a kind of bounciness and life to them, and you could tell this is healthy muscle tissue.
Yeah.
As opposed to, typical 40-year-old, where you could place your hands on parts of the body and the muscle tissues are clearly distressed. They're they're sometimes terribly overworking, very often the lower back on either side of the lower, you could feel the muscles are contracted, stiff, tight. And those are muscles that are not able to lengthen anymore the way they're designed to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a definable quality. And that's one of the elements that goes into that system working well. There are others, but that's
Yeah.
a key one.
Yeah. You know, the concept of tensegrity, it's a very rich concept, and it includes a concept that I really like and that I think is really helpful for, the definition of the normative function of muscle as a support system, and that's pre-stress. The concept of pre-stress. So in a man-made tensegrity system, the tensile elements, the things that are being pulled apart at both ends between the rigid elements, in order to build one of these things, you've got to sort of pry them apart first. This is one of the architectural challenges to making like a tensegrity sculpture. You've got to mount the tensile elements on the rigid elements in such a way that you can continue building them. And so they've got to be pulled apart, and they have to be, able to exert pull back on the rigid members at all times. So every single tensile element in that whole sculpture, in that whole object, is going to be what they call pre-stressed. It's going to be loaded already, so that it can actually exert pull on the rigid members. And I think, it helps with the normative function of muscle, because when you look at, the typical 2-year-old, when we say that their muscles are working well, one of the things that is happening is that all of their skeletal muscle, to varying degrees, is participating in this, you can say, pre-stress. Different fibers are going to be experiencing different levels of this based on how close they are to the spine, et cetera, et cetera. It's complicated, but they're all, I guess you can say, like loaded. And so all of the muscle system is like distributing tension all over the rest of the muscle system.
Yeah. No, it makes me think also when you talk about pre-stress, you think that if a structure has to be built, if you have a rigid part and you have a tensile part, and now you make a tent, let's say, with the the pole keeping the guy wire from, the guy wires are holding the pole up, but the pole is pushing on the guy wires to keep them stretched, and now you have an opposition that keeps the tent erect. Well, you think that someone has to build it. So people have even made this objection that you can't find, because it has to be constructed by an outside agent.
Yeah.
It can't be found in nature, and yet nature has all kinds of structures that are pre-stressed. So nature is doing it even without an intelligent designer, because nature is incredibly inventive and complex and subtle. And I find that interesting, right? That you'd think that this, by definition, can't be part of nature, but it most certainly. And if you think about it, here's a child in the womb, might be 2 months old, and you already have all kinds of pre-stressed elements. It's like someone's building it. It's not like they have to start using their muscles. All the different tissues, develop in the womb in such a way that they're already pre-stressed. And then you have an infant that comes out of the womb, might weigh 7 pounds, and the whole body is already elastic and pushing, and there's no fluidity in sight. It's already pre-stressed, and on top of that, the child has sensory functions operative, motor functions operative, starting to make actions, flailing limbs. The whole thing is active and pushing, and there are basic reflexes that are present. It's a living, moving tensegrity design.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And then someone says, hey, but the muscles can only contract. Well, if that's true, then why is the whole thing expansive? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
outward as if it wants to occupy space. It's part of its nature. It's
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to think about, the work that that we're doing to quote unquote get muscles to release, and, so we could feel better in the body. I mean, like what you're saying is like we're not just doing that, we're actually restoring natural function. And if we employ these concepts from tensegrity, we're restoring pre-stress.
yeah. We
And it's
lose.
almost like,
Yeah,
it's and so therefore we've got a theory that says, okay, well, the normative function of the muscle system is to be in a state of pre-stress, like a continuous
yeah,
state of pre-stress, even through normal activities.
yeah,
But that somehow we wind up interfering with pre-stress, which causes all kinds of problems.
yeah. Exactly. We want to relax muscles. We want someone to massage them. We want to collapse the system. We want to avoid, and that's all a problem because that's not how the system wants to work.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Well, so would you say, um, this is something that, that I think, but like, I think that natural function of the design, the pre-stress quality of muscles, for example, um, got to have a couple of questions, like it's pre-stress would be carried through all activities, and it could be carried through all activities. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only time the body doesn't have any stress or any pre-stress is when you're in a state of anesthesia, under anesthesia or in a state of, your paralysis. Is the only time. And then everything, then you see a complete collapse of muscle tone and everything
Mm-hmm.
falls apart.
Well, yeah, and I think this is what makes your use of this concept unique. In that, we're kind of privileging muscle here, but like the the muscle bone system where muscles are, as you say, lengthening. They're in a state of being pulled between origin and insertion points. They're in a state of pre-stress. All of the skeletal muscles that participate in posture. Um, Somehow we wind up interfering with this, where the entire system loses that and it goes into some weird compensatory state. Um, but I've heard people use the concept of tensegrity uh, to explain fascia, for example. And fascia isn't just a microstructure. It's not like a cell. It it's presumably all over the body. It's the body's connective tissues and the wrapping around organs. But I don't hear them talking about pre-stress. Hi, everyone. I'd like you to take a look at Ted Diamond's new book, Sensorimotor Awareness. This book lays out an entire curriculum of study that goes through mental skills, how the human body works, how we perform everyday activities in perhaps a harmful way, and how to overcome that. The book is on sale on Amazon and at your local bookseller.
So James, you mentioned fascia. Yeah.
Yeah, and the uniqueness of the way that you employ the concept of tensegrity and like what exactly you're applying it to. I've seen a lot of theorists as well use the word tensegrity to describe, not just different human systems like the shoulder, the knee, but the human system at large. And like you mentioned, fascia is a big topic these days. And it's obviously a soft tissue. It obviously would fit in a tensegrity muscle with, bone, in a tensegrity model, because there's the soft tissue, the membranous, stretchy tissue, and bones. Um, But yeah, I don't, I don't hear people using the concept tensegrity the way that I hear you using the concept of tensegrity. And I just, I want you to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I think in recent years, people have recognized that the notion that muscles pull on bones is crude, that there's something deeper and more global that has to be understood to explain movement and function. First of all, muscles don't attach to bone. Muscles are really embedded in connective tissue that attaches to bone and is continuous with connective tissue on bone and throughout the body. That's all true. But to then say that because muscles don't just pull on bone and there's a much wider, deeper connective tissue network or matrix in the body, still doesn't explain how the system is designed to work and what goes wrong with it. It's sort of identifying a global system within which muscles work that is now used to explain or sort of supersede the question of what we used to think traditionally was the problem. But muscles aren't just embedded in connective tissue. You have to explain how the muscle connective tissue, which now we could speak about as myofascial tissue as a continuity. You have to explain how that works with bones in such a way that the system can work as nature intended in a dynamic system. You just work on fascia. If anything, you're disengaging the system even more. And it begs the question of what went wrong with it and what you should do to get it working the way it was meant to work. So it's sort of a misdirection. And another problem is if you identify fascia as being this sort of global underlying network that explains everything, you're reducing a higher level problem to a lower level, because nature is not only creating an incredibly complex structure here, but when you understand how the structure works, you have a higher order kind of principle, namely how we function in our upright posture, that now has to be understood in order to maintain fascia and the whole system in a coordinated state. And if you reduce everything to a lower level structure, you're not going to be able to do much with it. So everything has to go toward higher level understanding, higher level function, higher level structures. And that's what tensegrity really means, which is how to coordinate the system as a dynamic system. So if someone comes to me and they say, I've got a back problem, but I know what to do about it, they've got to be able to show me how their back works in a way that is healthy, that they can apply to activity. And if they can't do that, they just got a theory, you see?
Yeah. The higher level, or the highest level structure is the human body as a whole. And if there's a functional design, if there's a way that this system coheres that can be like analogized to tensegrity models, of course it's much more complicated than that, but like it's analogous to a tensegrity model when it's working well. And that's the big distinction. Like when it's working well, its function is analogous to that of a tensegrity model, where it's like muscles are working as a a system that resists pull and is working together with bones to provide spring-like buoyancy. That's the highest level. That's the highest level. Just like you said, that's the highest level structure, and that's the thing that has to be accounted for. That's the thing that has to be understood, and everything below that has to somehow be able to participate in it. You can't reduce it to some lower level aspect of it, whether it's bone, whether it's muscle, whether it's fascia.
Right. And it's an upright structure. I mean, in humans, it takes the form of being upright. And if you don't understand it in that context, then you're not, it's sort of like, think about the voice. If you say the voice is all about connective tissue, well, yeah, of course it is. And a lot of, many elements in how the larynx functions are myoelastic. We know that a lot of acoustical properties, let's say, of the larynx, or the ability for the vocal folds to vibrate efficiently, these are myoelastic properties. But if you reduce your understanding to the elasticity of connective tissues or something, well, what about the fact that we're human and that it's all gone toward a higher level of organization in the form of using the voice? Highest level of control has to come at the level of using the voice as the new higher order system that we've inherited. And the same is true with upright posture in general. I would say that the tensegrity systems in land vertebrates are the most complex architectural structures in the known universe, so thus far. And the human upright posture might be the most complex architectural structure of all. And we have to understand how to use it in action. And if you can't show me how you're going to sit and use it, then you're just giving me theories about cells or, nature. I don't want a theory. I want a theory that works. And yeah. And then there's also, I just want to mention, James, there's also the awareness side of it, which is, it's worth mentioning, is sort of a theme. And we have more to say about this in future, podcasts. But if we talked about how you restore the system. We know how it works. We could see it in a 2-year-old, but we can identify how it gets interfered with in adults. We could restore it so you could feel the back muscles working properly, the neck muscles, the shoulders, the whole thing sort of lets go into length. It's a beautiful thing to watch. You could see it in people who know how to be kinesthetically aware and to use their awareness in an organized way. You could see the system change on the spot. Well, when that happens, now you may have to use your awareness in a certain way to get to that point. But when you get to that point, now it brings about a new level of emergent awareness that you could begin to bring into your daily activity, so that the tensegrity structure restored consciously. Remember, a 2-year-old may have it working beautifully, but they don't know how it works. We have to learn how it works and restore it at a conscious level. But the tensegrity structure, when restored, now produces an emergent level of awareness, which makes it possible to walk down the street or perform simple activities aware of yourself in a new way that can be brought into all your activities. And that's only the beginning, because there's even more to say about it. When you actually study how activity happens, you can become more conscious of what's going on because of that foundation. But the tensegrity system now helps you become aware. So in contrast to what we said at the beginning, where we say, well, muscles are tight and I have to use my awareness to try to release them. Now we're using our awareness to restore the system, which gives us a new level of awareness. And I think that's just sort of an amazing kind of outcome of how the system works and understanding it.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's really one thing to say, okay, well, how does this physical system work? You can look at a child, and then, you can look at the discoordinated system of your typical adult, and then you can teach that adult to restore that system. And of course, the theoretical claim that you're making here, and the reason you use tensegrity, is that there's actually a design. You're returning it to actual function, and it works on principles that can be described or analogized to tensegrity. So you've got that, and then, well, like one of the things that we said earlier was pre-stress, and so you can carry this into all your activities, or the system can work in this manner in all sorts of activities: sitting, standing, playing violin, singing, etc. But it's another thing it's just a whole nother interesting level to say that this is actually not just a physical thing that's returning, or it's not even a physical thing that's just, that you're restoring, but in this conscious restoration of this physical system, what you're bringing about is an emergent level of awareness. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
like that's it isn't just physical properties that you're restoring here, as interesting as that is,
Yeah.
as amazing a claim as that is, like, because that's something that you're really stepping in as a theoretical claim here, Ted. It's like you're
Yeah.
restoring the actual design specs.
Yeah.
But once you're there, now you've emerged, or your awareness is now it's now changed in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, and what is that? It's proprioception or kinesthetic awareness, and there's so here you have we the topic last week was body awareness, and
Hmm.
we talk about body awareness, and many of us practice it, or we do a form of yoga practice, or Pilates, or relaxation, or body scanning, where we pay attention to the body, thinking that we're using our awareness to make improvements. But no one has articulated proprioception or kinesthetic awareness, which is the actual sensory function, applies to muscles and joints. No one's actually given a theory for what it means to use proprioception to make changes. Proprioception is largely unconscious. And we're getting proprioceptive feedback about our bodies all the time. If you didn't, you'd fall off your chair. I mean, you have to have feedback from your body all the time. It's coming and from parts of the body integrated in the brain. We have recurring pathways occurring all the time. And we have a little bit of a part of it that's conscious that we can apply to this or that part of the body. But that's only the tip of the iceberg, because when you understand how the system works, now you're beginning to make the kinesthetic function or parts of it totally conscious.
Mm.
And now it becomes a part of what I would describe as part of a mindfulness practice, or part of what it means to be mindful. And we don't usually speak about mindfulness except as a sort of a state of attention, in terms of attention level. We don't think of proprioception as part of that, but I think that there are various functions that can become more conscious, not just our attention level. And it's almost as if the proprioception now contributes to our ability to be more attentive in daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of a topic for another day. But
Yeah.
but if you're interested in the problem of awareness, as I was when I did this, because I felt that there was some potential here to be unearthed, then you're really not just learning body awareness, but you're learning to be more aware in daily life.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and we can, I'm looking forward to having a conversation about about particular structures in the body.
Yeah.
If we're going to describe or employ some of the concepts from Tensegrity to the design of the human body,
Mm.
then there's elements of that structure. I guess like the way that you've described it as like subsystems, system,
Yeah.
you know,
You mean
shoulder,
like the back or the
yeah,
shoulders? Yeah.
back, shoulders, the legs, the famous head, neck, trunk region, all this, like,
Yeah.
you know, one of the things that winds up occurring in an adult who learns how to restore this function is that you wind up understanding that or seeing in real time that the body is like a mechanical structure with very interesting properties, like the shoulders widening, you know like you would be able to describe um the body in terms of like push pull systems composed of rigid elements and membranous elements, myofascial elements that work together to form new interesting functional structures. Like new interesting functional structures with their own properties. And those add up together to the human upright organism. And it's like, you wouldn't know about these things unless.
You mean new, when you say new functional structures, you mean new functional properties or?
Well, yeah, like, the head, the head and neck, where the head is this sort of forward weighted object, and the myofascial membrane that's sort of both attaching it to the neck, but also like being pulled by the head. This is an interesting object, I guess you can say, that's composed of other objects with their own functional properties.
Right. Yeah, you could identify if you. I think that that's a hard one to explain, in brief, quickly. But like the shoulders, the shoulders have, let's say, a basic design component that is that you can identify, that is sort of the key to how they work properly, which I would describe as widening. It's in the book, where when I talk about the shoulders, I actually describe what, generally speaking, goes wrong with them, and that needs to be addressed in order for the shoulders to work like they do in a typical 2-year-old. That's a quality of expansion that you can identify. And so, it's not a new structure. I mean, it works. We all have shoulders.
Sure. Yeah.
The widening quality is a functional property that we can identify as part of how they work that has never been identified. Everything, we have shoulders in terms of specific parts that go wrong, without understanding that doesn't explain what goes wrong in practical terms that help us to restore its natural function.
Yeah.
So and it's maybe, I think that is maybe a topic that we'll talk about, the different systems. You mentioned the head, the balance of the head on the neck is one of them, the shoulder is another, or how the arms work, and the hand is sort of the effector organ at the end of the hands.
Yeah.
The trunk, the breathing, the throat. We could talk about different functional systems because it's sort of a fascinating topic.
Yeah, the curves of the spine, etc. Like.
Yeah, the upright properties of the spine.
Yeah. This is all. It's all illuminated when we employ the concept of tensegrity. I mean, this is a thing that we experience when we're working. This is one of the things that we experience when we're working practically. But like the illumination provided by the concept of tensegrity, I think is really important to our field, theoretically speaking.
Yeah.
I think it's a concept that we've not only got to grapple with, but we can use productively. And if the human body isn't an example of a strict tensegrity object, like discontinuous compression, continuous tension, so what? I mean, to me, it's like, okay, well, it's way more interesting and complex than a man-made tensegrity structure. But like, we need to employ these concepts, I think.
I'm glad you raised it, because that standard definition of discontinuous, struts and continuous tension is a little misleading, because it sounds like some abstract thing. If it doesn't meet those criteria, it's not tensegrity. And some people have said that about the human body, because there's all sorts of compression elements in the human body. For instance, the ability to bear weight on our feet, or the spine, which resists compression. So we are actually a really complex intermixing of compression elements, tensegrity elements, and And you're absolutely right. It's still a tensegrity structure, because if it were just a compression structure, when you lie down, it would collapse. But you can see the body lengthen even when you're in water, and you're lying on your side, if you're in funny positions. So the system is actually always functioning like a tensegrity structure, even though it has the sort of internal compression elements and is designed to resist compression in a field of gravity. So it's kind of a fascinating, complex mix of elements. But
Yeah.
there's plenty more to say on that. And
Yeah, there's so much to say, and bringing up the, you know, bringing up, the fact that it's a mix of compression and tension, et cetera. I mean, this is, it like opens up whole new podcast topics that we can talk about, like for example, the fact that we're an evolutionary object, like we're the descendants of simple vertebral organisms that were living in water. We're like the descendants of interesting hydrostatic objects, like that, that like retain those properties in some sense.
yeah.
We definitely are not like a tensegrity structure that like somebody pieced together out of like rods and wires. I mean, it's like way more interesting than that.
Yeah.
But the fact is, like there are, there's the myofascial element, and then there's the bone element, and there is principles in nature that seem to require just absolute efficiency of function. It seems somehow in human beings that can get like interfered with in very interesting ways. And I think that this concept of tensegrity, it just sheds so much theoretical light on what's happening when we do work the way that we do.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot to talk about. A lot
Yeah.
to talk about in the future.
Yeah, good note to end maybe. And just want to thank everyone for joining.
Yeah, thank everybody. Thank you, Ted.
Yep.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you to Jeannie in the background for helping to make this happen. That's
Yes.
our direct Jeannie, our
Genius production team.